on this TFS Pocket, you've got to be running out of games at this point.
This is TFS Pocket number 31, and we're excited to bring you a special on Big 20 number 8. We'll explain what that is in a second, but this is our first ever co-op pocket. You get me and Chad for free on the same pocket, basically a full episode, but you get it for free in between the major episodes.
The topic was too hot for just either one of us to do it by
itself. I had to hop in.
Yeah,
I had to hop in.
John had to jump in here and get on this one.
And if you're new to the podcast or you just found us, we are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where we try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever strategies, glitches, tricks, anything we can to get to the game or the goal as quickly as possible. And so this week we're talking about a big race called Big 20 number 8. It is 20 NES games run in a row. It usually has a ton of participants. How many? 50, something like that?
In recent history, some of the latest ones have been 30s and 40s. I think the early ones were big blowouts just because of how popular it was, but they've been going for so long at this point that I think it's maybe calmed down to a really dedicated group that does them every single time.
Yeah, we used to focus more on these. So actually, we had a lot of episodes that were kind of half one game, half Big 20. Back in the past, I think when Big 27 came, we kind of just missed it or didn't do much about it. We might have paid a little homage to it, but we want to just kind of go over this game list and talk about each game. There's just a bunch of interesting ones here. But if you want to check out this race, this is posting before it, so you can check it out on March 3rd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/bestofnes. It's going to be a lot of fun. The participants essentially get 1 month to learn all of these different goals in these games, which is insane. 20 games over 30 days. Basically, you have to learn a game a day. The people who compete at the highest level of this are spending this whole month learning this. They're probably spending 6 to 8 hours a day just focused on Big 20 for a month. It's
for
kind
perspective,
of
I had participated in Big 20 number 2, and I had to spend the entirety of those 30 days working on these games, and that only afforded me enough time to learn it at the level where I was able to get within an hour of the first place time. That wasn't even at the highest level.
So it's a really fun race to watch. The top runners are always the ones who put the most time into it, but that's cool, and I think that's a good thing. So why don't we just go ahead and dive into this games list? So we have 20 games to talk about. We're going to try and kind of rapid fire touch them, talk about what the goals are, kind of a little history of them, and maybe what to expect when you see them run. So what's the first game in the? We're doing these in order of how they'll be run as well. They have to be run in this actual order.
Yeah, so the tradition of the Big 20 is that the game list comes out and they each have their own unique goals, but you have to play them in the order that they're listed. And the first one up is pretty much not a huge surprise because the first game always seems to be a Donkey Kong game of some sort. This time around, we're starting to hit the limits of the Donkey Kong franchise.
The bottom of the barrel.
Oh wow. So we've got Donkey Kong Jr. Math. And the goal for this one is just beat the first 3 stages. So this is kind of an interesting game. If you don't know about the history of Donkey Kong Jr. Math, just like a quick synopsis of it is this was the only game that was released in the NES Education series. I think they had conceived of the idea of doing an education series, but it wasn't particularly successful. And it released on its own initially, but it actually released much later as a bundle with Donkey Kong Jr., which was Nintendo's very first licensed multi-cart. So these two games combined. And it was released as part of a bundle with the Sharp C1 NES TV. So if you're not familiar with that, that was a television that got produced that had an NES built into it, and they released this multi-cart with it. So it had Donkey Kong Jr. and Donkey Kong Jr. Math. And then later they had released this multi-cart like freestanding, so you could purchase it. The only other NES multi-cart I'm aware of, I think, is Final Fantasy 1 and 2.
Well, what about Duck Hunt Mario 1 track?
I guess that's true. The Duck Hunt, yeah, you're right. That was a proper multi-cart as well. So if you've ever played Donkey Kong Jr., this game
One thing real quick, the Sharp C1 NES TV, if you're not aware what that is, it was a TV that released, I think, only in Japan. It might have released in the US, but it was a TV with an NES built into it, kind of like TVs have VHSs built into it. If you check on YouTube, a friend of mine, Kelsey Lewin, she does a podcast called Game Blitz. I believe she did a YouTube video just dedicated to this TV. That's pretty interesting. But you can find some interesting information on it. They're hard to come by, obviously. They're pretty collectible. obviously expensive to ship, but it's a neat concept to have the NES built right into your television.
For sure. Yeah, so if you've played Donkey Kong Jr., this game should look fairly familiar. You play as Donkey Kong Jr. and you jump around on on vines. But unlike the typical Donkey Kong Jr. game, in this one, you are grabbing numbers off of a vine and symbols off of the ground to combine into some target number. So if the number, for instance, is like 66, you might, look for the 11 and the 3 and multiply them together, or 11 and the 6 and multiply them together.
So it's going to be an unfair challenge for those who have never learned any math.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty tough. If you don't know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, you're going to be in really rough shape. I think the race on this one is just on Compute A mode. There's two main modes, Compute A and Compute B, and Compute B is the harder one. They have much larger target numbers. So fortunately, they're trying to spare people the disappointment of having to, really learn math.
Yeah, and this is 3 levels is the goal. It should take about 45 seconds. The world record, which is 5 stages, is about a minute and 9 seconds by Critis.
Yeah,
Crytas. Not sure why they didn't just do the whole thing at that point, but maybe it gets heavy RNG or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it might be something like that. I know this is not uncommon for them. For instance, Donkey Kong 3 was one of the goals. I think it was in Big 20 number 3. And even though one loop is 5 stages, they only included 3 stages in the goal. And I think that's just because there was a lot of variance in the later 2 stages that they were trying to avoid.
Yeah, this is a pretty collectible game. It's hard to come by, and it's worth about $75. There's a lot of pretty expensive games on this list. It'll be interesting to see if anybody tries to get all of the carts to run it, because spoilers, one of the most expensive NES games that exists is coming up later. So I would be very shocked if somebody does decide to do that. But the people have been known to do it, so it'd be interesting. The next game is Archon. This game is a point of pride for me because I beat Darbian in this game. And just to be able to say I beat Darbian in something, to be fair, neither of us had played it, and we played it one time, and I won, and I'll probably never play it again now because of that. But this was published by Electronic Arts in 1983 for the Atari 8-bit computers under the title Archon, the Light and the Dark. And it was ported to a ton of different consoles, including the NES. And basically, it's similar to chess. But once your 2 pieces interact with each other, you don't automatically win if you move your piece to their piece. You end up in this arcade style combat that's like top down, and have to fight each other. And certain certain pieces have different powers that are easily more powerful than others, or work better against certain ones. So it's kind of cool. It's so basically you don't have to be good at chess to win in it, as long as you can win in the combat. But if
the world
if
record's very fast in this
Yeah.
too. You basically there's a few different sort of win conditions for this game. You can either capture all of the opponent's pieces, you can capture all of the opponent's pieces, or defeat all the opponent's pieces except for one that you've captured, or you can try to gain control of I think it's 5 different focus points on the board. And the world record basically grabs control of a few of the focus points right away and then runs in directly to capture one of the opponent's main pieces. It's
so it's 58 seconds by Ness Cardinality, who's been doing tons of NES speedruns lately. He was on for our Dragon Warrior episode and was awesome, so go check that out. This is a really fun game, though. Honestly, I recommend playing this if you're goofing around with a friend, you have an NES, and you're looking for some sort of multiplayer game to play that probably neither of you have played and have like a upper hand on. This is a good one. I had a lot of fun playing it against Darbian.
Yeah, this is one of those gems on the NES for multiplayer. There aren't a lot of them out there, and I don't think a lot of consoles do multiplayer really well, but this and North and South are 2 really great multiplayer versus games. And
It's interesting. There's a couple of multiplayer co-op games on this list too that we'll get to later. So
yeah, we will.
Bit of multiplayer focus here.
Yeah. So next up, we've got ice hockey.
Do you know what sport that is?
Yeah, it's I think ice hockey.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I actually had this game growing up. I love this game.
It's good.
This
it's
is
a good game.
Really, really good sports game. Probably one of the best sports games I've ever played. That and NFL Blitz. But this was
fun.
This was originally released for the Famicom Disk System in 1988, and then later for the NES in North America. It was directed by Hideki Kono, who later went on to direct Super Mario Kart, Yoshi's Island, and Luigi's Mansion. So he's got a pretty great resume himself. And this
None of them
is
touched ice hockey though.
none of them could quite compete with ice hockey. I mean, ice hockey was rated by Nintendo Power as the 142nd best game of all time.
Ooh,
I just want to
some
put that out there
hot
that a
praise.
a hockey game made top 142. And I didn't look at Blades of Steel or anything like that. I'm not sure if it made the list, but I feel like ice hockey might be one of the best rated on that list as far as sports games go.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I've had to play a lot of 8-bit sports games with Game Boy Quest and stuff. Certain sports work well on 8-bit sports and some don't. Hockey works really well. Like Blades of Steel's a lot of fun. Ice hockey's a lot of fun. Sadly, football games are all absolutely wretched. So, but this is actually a really fun game. I know when like Pat the NES Punk does his marathon, his NES marathon, they always play ice hockey, and he always like destroys Pat. And
I used to play it with my
it's
cousin
a
all
fun
the
game.
time. I feel like
Yeah.
hockey and soccer and those sorts of games where there's like really frantic action that doesn't get
Yeah.
frequently stopped, and there's not like a lot of structure to it, works really well for 8-bit consoles.
Absolutely.
Um,
So
and and it's kind of hard for us to estimate these goals in general, just because of the fact that a lot of times these goals don't really match up with existing speedrun categories. But there does happen to be a speedrun for ice hockey, get 10 goals. And I took a look at that one, and the world record for get 10 goals completes 3 goals in under a minute. So I would say that
sports speedruns are the purest form of speedrunning.
yeah, some people really like to speedrun everything, and this is an example of that. But I think it's probably realistic that this will be one of those goals that only takes a minute or two for the top
Seems like
players.
there's been a lot of people focusing on NHL 94 lately for the SNES and doing like speedruns of that. So maybe there's a hockey renaissance coming to the speedrun world.
That's what it is. It's
Yeah.
hockey's seen its heyday.
So the next game I think people have probably heard of, it's called Pac-Man.
Okay.
And so basically this was released in 1984 for the NES. I don't believe there was any arcade version ever made, was there?
I think there was actually.
Oh, okay. No, wait. This is a port of the arcade game. No, but in all seriousness, this was created by Tori Iwatani and was released by Namco. The NES port has a limited screen size, and so it features a smaller board with fewer pellets to eat in each stage. And like, what does the speed run look like? This beat 3 stages.
Yeah, so it's pretty fast paced. It can be easier to manipulate the AI, but there are a lot of changes between this version and the arcade version. I think that's to be expected when you have a port, but it's kind of
Sure.
interesting the way that manifests itself in this run. So, like for instance, when you eat a power pellet in the arcade version, every time the ghosts change between their scatter and their chase state, they change directions. But actually, in the NES version, they don't change their direction when changing specifically from their chase state to their scatter state. So when they go from chasing you to like running from you, and so because they don't change directions, it can be kind of hard to predict their movement. And
Interesting.
I've heard that that is a major frustration for being able to predict the AI. And also the ghost hitboxes are somewhat larger than the arcade hitboxes. If you've ever watched someone play the arcade version, you can get away with some pretty clutch saves, just like barely edging out some of the ghosts. But the hitboxes are much larger in the NES version, so you can't really
Interesting.
afford that sort of closeness to the
Now, question, and
yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but do you know if they're specifically doing the Namco version versus the Tengen
I
version
actually
of
don't
this?
know. My guess is that it's probably the Namco version, but I
Mhm.
didn't see any notes anywhere. And when I was researching this, I found that there was a Namco and a Tengen version.
I wonder if they're at all different because I bet people are gonna put the wrong ROM on their power pack. I'm sure it doesn't make that much of a difference, but Tengen released an unlicensed version of Pac-Man, so you can get one of those nifty black carts, or you can just get a standard Pac-Man
Yeah,
cart. I don't
unlicensed
know if
by
there's any difference.
Nintendo, but licensed by Namco.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. If you're familiar with the arcade version, you probably already know that there are 255 stages before you hit the kill screen, where the game basically is uncompletable at that point. So a lot of people who are big arcade purists or arcade speedrunners or points runners, whatever you want to call it. This is a pretty popular game because it has a pretty fixed ending. After 255
Mhm.
stages, the game does end. The NES version
It's
does
a
not
lot
have.
of Pac-Man.
Yeah, it really is. It's like 3 hours, I think. 3 hours is how long it takes to get to the kill screen, for a competent player. But the NES version doesn't have a kill screen, so that's maybe worth noting. And the goal can be completed in under 3 minutes. There's actually a speed run of just levels 1 through 9. on speedrun.com, and Starcritus has that world record, and he completes level 3 in 2 minutes and 19 seconds. So this
So
should be
he's
another
he's he's into
relatively
those arcade games, this
yeah
Starcritus. So if you're
y-
looking for some speed runs of arcade games, apparently
yeah
that's where it's at.
definitely.
The next game, Dragon's Lair.
Oh no.
I'm sorry if you're if you're participating in this. I'm very sorry if you're participating in this game race blind. Sometimes every year somebody like goes into it without
Oh, I
having
didn't
learned
even
any
think
of the
about that.
games.
That's going to be a real problem.
It's
There
gonna be a
there are
real
blind runners,
problem.
and this is not the game you want to go into blind.
That and Castlevania 2 are going to be real problems. So, this is based on a 1983 interactive movie Laserdisc arcade game by ex-Disney animator Don Bluth, also known for the Space Ace game, if you've played that on the SNES, which is also a game that's very interesting. And there's also a sequel called Dragon's Lair 2 Time Warp, but this game was ported to everything. The arcade game was really revolutionary. I mean, if you have seen like Stranger Things on Netflix, which is like early 80s, you see them playing Dragon's Lair in the arcade. And I remember specifically when the 3DO came out, my dad bought it specifically because it had a very realistic Dragon's Lair like port to it or
Yeah, I
whatever.
have the
Like it
version
was,
for the CDI. It's a direct port of
yeah.
the arcade laserdisc
And,
version.
and it's like a really gorgeous game, like the arcade game. It's all hand drawn, I believe. It's like really animated. It's basically an interactive cartoon, uh, basically set with like times, what do they call them, quick time events? Isn't it mostly like quick time events, like you
Yeah,
have
the
to go
game.
left or right, and and basically you're going to keep putting quarters in until you guess the right number of combinations to get through the story.
Yeah, the genre is often referred to as interactive movie, which sounds like it's being critical, but it's really not. The game really is just basically a movie that you're watching, and you have to input the right inputs at the right times, or else the game stops. So you'll get like a game over screen because you died, and there's lots of unique death animations and things like that. At each point in the story, if you don't
Hmm.
get the timing right on things, then you get some clever death animation, death scene for the mistake that you made.
Yeah, it
This
was
was
a
a
huge
major
pop
card
culture
reader.
phenomenon,
Yeah.
and I think Princess Daphne, is that who you're
Mm-hmm.
rescuing?
Yep.
She's a babe. She's a
Oh yeah.
babe. It
She's a
motivates you to
fox.
rescue her. You're like, that's a babe. So this was a really, really popular game back then. However, they didn't port it very well to a lot of different things. And this was released for the NES in 1990. There's a SNES one, 1992. I'm gonna have to play Game Boy one for Game Boy Quest. Not looking forward to that. I cannot imagine how bad that's gonna be.
And this
In
one's
the
not.
PAL,
It's
yeah,
yeah. It's not a an interactive movie on the NES or SNES. It's a platformer adaptation actually. So
yeah, which
so it
is
plays
weird.
more like a platformer, but with all of the same BS deaths that you've come to expect from the Laserdisc version. So
That's interesting. Yeah, it's funny because that kind of genre of game has become pretty popular again. I mean, like the Telltale games are all basically interactive movies. I
okay,
play like Life is Strange. I love those games. They're basically interactive movies. You
okay,
make
yeah.
choices and you see what happens.
I didn't think about that
So
as being an analog, but yeah, I can see where you're coming
yeah,
from.
I mean not directly the same because there's no quick time events
Sure.
usually, but yeah. And do you want to talk about the differences with the PAL version?
Yeah, I was trying to do some research on this game, and I noticed that the PAL version's world record is about 5 minutes, and the NTSC version's world record is like 14 minutes. And
Hmm,
I I'm not. I think that more time has been invested into the world record on the PAL version, but after watching it, it seems pretty clear to me that the PAL version very likely runs faster. Like visually, your character moves around faster
mhm.
and performs actions faster. So the world record on that one may not be directly comparable to um, the NTSC version, which they're almost certainly using for the Big 20. The PAL version's world record is just under 6 minutes. And so this goal would be completable very quickly. In the NTSC world record, this goal, like beat the mine boss, which is the goal for this game, happened shortly under 5 minutes. So I want to say that it can probably be more optimized than that, but I don't know by how much because it does seem like the NTSC version runs a little more slowly.
Sure. And I think this is really the point of the race where you're going to see people falling off or taking off in terms of like those first four games can all be beaten pretty quickly and you're going to see probably pretty close times going, especially from the runners who've practiced. But the people who have not practiced, Dragon's Lair is going to be the point where you're going to see people get stuck for a while.
It's about
The
this
next,
point in
yeah,
the Big 20 where there's always like one game that's like a huge stopper for people. Like I
yeah,
seem to recall tennis being like
yep,
the third or fourth game for that big 20, and that was the one that was just going to stop people for a while. And so like there always seems to be this game like 4 or 5 games in that if you haven't practiced enough, it's going to be the stopping point for a lot of people.
Absolutely. So, the next game is Spy Hunter, which is another arcade port. This is one loop, no out of bounds. What's interesting is that the no out of bounds category didn't exist until Big 20. I saw on the speedrun.com leaderboard because all the times on it are 2 to 3 days old. There's only a couple, but
Right.
so I think the main speed run was the out of bounds version. The thing with the out of bounds thing is you kind of just clip out of bounds and just stay out of bounds for 2 minutes and then it's over.
Oh,
So I'm guessing they wanted something a little bit more interactive.
cushy
So
speedrun if
yeah,
you can get it.
yeah. I think there's some differences into how you get exactly the times you do. So it's still like a precise world record grind, but for something like this, it would be kind of silly. So it's an overhead car combat game developed and published by Bally Midway. It was released in 1983 for the arcade and then sent to all the old systems, the MSX, the ColecoVision, anything you can think of, it came out on.
This is the one where the arcade machine was a steering wheel and a foot pedal, right? Like there was actually
Think so?
I
think
think there
so.
was like actually a foot pedal on it, and you stand up at the arcade holding the. I seem to recall having played this game
Interesting.
in an
Okay,
arcade.
yeah, I didn't see that. I should have looked that up. But it also received an NES exclusive sequel called Super Spy Hunter that was not like an arcade game or anything. And the world record for this category, quote unquote, is 307. Again, like this category has only existed since Big 20 was announced, it seems. So but the out of bounds world record's 251. So it's only like 16 seconds difference. So it's just really mostly trying to, you know, get people to play the game as intended a little bit more. And you're mostly just avoiding other cars, trucks, helicopter fire. You can shoot. And one thing I saw in the Wikipedia actually that I found interesting is it says it's possible for the player to convert the car into a go fast boat for brief periods. But that's not used in the speedrun at all. So I'm assuming it's slower to do that, but it seemed like an interesting thing to add. But it's a pretty basic game. You start off with like unlimited lives for a period of it, and then I think you have a limited number of lives once you get a certain depth into it. And then once you finish the whole whatever, it just keeps looping. But I mean, it even when it starts re-looping, it all looks the same. So I guess you have to know the game to know when the loop starts.
I
It's
mean, this is
pretty,
another very standard arcade port to
yeah.
NES. I
It's
mean,
a simple game,
this Big 20 list is filled with the classic arcade to NES ports.
definitely. Um, so that's about it for that. Paperboy is the next game, and the goal is just a whole week.
Yeah.
So this is interesting if you want to talk about kind of the history of running Paperboy, that
Yeah,
because you
so
kind of started it, I guess.
yeah, I think I'm the one who set up the Paperboy leaderboard initially, and I'm the one who initiated the sort of long-standing policy that speedruns are done with perfect delivery. So you have to have perfect delivery the whole week in order for the speedrun to be valid. So this is a port of the 1985 arcade game that was developed and published by Atari Games, and I think that there's probably so if they're not doing perfect delivery, I don't know how tough it will be to play it blind, but
hmm
I wonder whether or not they're going to change it to perfect delivery to make it more challenging for blind players. Nonetheless, this is definitely a challenging game.
For
It's
sure.
not easy to beat the game, despite what you may think. If you haven't played in a while, you should play it again to really relive the frustration of this
Yeah,
game.
if you've never played this, essentially you're a paper delivery boy. You have houses that you're supposed to deliver to, either by throwing the paper against the door or into the mailbox. And there's all kinds of obstacles in the way to stop you. Everything's one hit death. And if as long as you have one subscriber left, you can move on to the next day. And the goal is to make it through the whole week. So you could theoretically hit one house and then just book it the rest of the way and just avoid the obstacles. So I don't know how they're going to adjust for that. I had to play this for Game Boy, and that port is even harder and worse. But this is not an easy game,
No.
especially if you don't know where the obstacles are coming and stuff. There's a lot of memorization that comes with it. The world record is actually by Peanut a Fan 22. He has a 10:42 and 400 milliseconds. I point that out because I think he's only like a half a second ahead of second. So it's a pretty hotly contested speed game.
Yeah, the variance in the categories, since you can, there's not a ton of lag to speak of. There is some, and mitigating that is definitely part of the speedrun. But the main variance in the speedrun is actually completing the end of the day. So every time you
Mhm.
get to the end of the day, at the end of the road, there's a little obstacle course, but you can actually crash
Oh,
before it without having to do the obstacle course, and that will count as completing it properly. So like if you crash right before you go into the obstacle course, the game's okay with that. As a matter of fact, if you crash anytime after you've passed the last house, rather than restarting you where you left off, the game just moves on to the next day. So the major variance is actually figuring out either how to manipulate or how to manage to crash as early as possible.
yep.
When I was running it, I just crashed on the curb on the other side of the street right before you go into the obstacle course, and that'll net you a 1050 in the game if you do that every single time. But after I sort of set the game down and stopped playing it, they had discovered that it's not too hard to set it up so you can actually crash into either a car or a bike crossing the street. And so you can end it just a little bit earlier. And so that's where the
Gotcha.
major variance comes from.
And you do not have to do the obstacle course for perfect week, right? That
No,
doesn't
you do
affect
not.
that at all.
The
Okay.
only thing
Yeah.
required for a perfect delivery is to make sure you deliver a paper to every single house that's a subscriber.
Gosh, that seems so hard. So the next game is the California Raisins, The Grape Escape. Now, you might have heard of this game because we talked about it in episode 33, Bad Games number 4. The Darbian came on and talked about it. This game has had a renaissance, not just because of Big 20, because there was some sort of group that decided to all learn the speedrun together. I saw them tweet at us or somebody, and so there's like 6 or 7 new times on the leaderboard from like the past month, from even before Big 20. And the world record's actually been lowered a huge chunk for the length of this game. The world record when we had that episode was 442, or was 523 by Darby, and now it's a 442 by the Kavanik. So that's 30 seconds, 40 seconds,
That
41
that's
seconds in
pretty
a
significant.
5-minute game. So there must have been new discoveries since we did that episode. But basically, this was a never released prototype by Capcom. It has a really interesting story as to how it was discovered. So if you want to hear that, go check out the episode more. But it is really interesting. Like, it didn't get discovered until like 2003 or something like that. And it's basically 5 stages of jumping, shooting grape juice, climbing vines, and the select button lets you moonwalk, which is awesome. Has
Yeah,
some sweet music. It's a
it's
fun
a
game.
it's a really unique game because it's a prototype. It's got a handful of sort of glitches and bugs that all lend themselves very well to this being a pretty interesting speed game, actually. So for certain, check out the episode 33 that we did on this game. It has a great history behind it, how it was found, and
It's
the
a tough
additions.
speed game too.
Yeah,
It's not easy.
I ran it with Darby and I couldn't keep up with him, but nonetheless, the speed game is absolutely fascinating. It's just got so much really interesting tech that makes it a really high quality speed run.
Everybody tweeted Darby and asked him when he's taking the Raisins record back. I
He's
need it to be
gotta,
in his hands.
yeah.
So next game, also a friend of ours runs, Hammer and Harry. This is a really cool series that we didn't really get much of in North America. Actually, I don't think we got any Hammer and Harry games in North America, but they released in Japan and Europe. This one is known as Daiku no Gensan, which is Gen the Carpenter. And basically, it was originally an arcade game that received 2 Famicom games, actually 2 Game Boy games, which I wasn't aware of. I thought there was only one. There's a SNES game, a Game Boy Color game, and a PSP game. So there's this whole series, and actually, like, I think a short manga or anime came out. I think an anime came out like after the PSP one came out, like in 2003
A
or
Hammer and
something. So
Harry anime?
yeah, yeah, that's what it said.
I
So that's
love
kind of
that.
interesting.
Yeah, so
So
this
the
is
world record 704 by Pip Johnson. You might have seen him run this at GDQ Summer Games Done Quick 2017.
mhm.
He really optimized this game to a ridiculous level, like to almost to an SMB1 like level. It was, every one of his splits is +1 or minus or plus point 0.1. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah,
But he has the
he
world record
really
of this
worked
and
this game
2.
out. He really figured out how to save maximum amounts of time from, taking strats directly from the task to basically doing runs until he got all of the perfect RNG he was looking
Yep.
for. It's really really optimized.
This is one of those world records I don't foresee falling from Big 20 practice, similar to like Little Nemo Dream Master. We had Havoc Prodigy on like our first guest, like episode 5 or something. This is one of those games where somebody poured so much time into it that it's like it's gonna stand. But it'll be cool to see new people run it. Maybe if they can find something new.
Yeah, I'm
The
hopeful that there might
SNESing,
be some new strats or something like that. I mean, that would definitely be able to
absolutely.
bring the time down. Someone someone like White Hat or Toad who comes along and can execute roughly at the level of Pip Johnson while at the same time incorporating new strats. That could really be a breakthrough for the game, and that'd be nice to see.
Definitely. And the SNES and Game Boy records are both held by our boy Spiderweb. So they're cool. It's a cool series. There's not enough people on the leaderboard for any of these games. They're a lot of fun. So go check one out if you're looking for like a fun standard platformer to play. But basically you have a giant hammer as a weapon. You can also smash the ground and like knock enemies over. And it's basically just a highly optimized platformer, but it's a lot of fun. Honestly, the Game Boy one is really good as well. Really unfortunate these games never came out in North America because most people aren't familiar with them, but it's a really good series.
All right, and number 10, our 10th game on the list is Palamedes.
Everyone's favorite game.
Palamedes? Palamedes?
Palamedes?
I don't know, Palamedes. And so this game has a few modes, one of which is a tournament mode, and the category for this game is just beat the tournament mode. And so this was a puzzle game that was released in 1990 by the Taito Corporation. The general premise of the game is that it's a puzzle board. It kind of vaguely reminds me of like maybe Bust a Move, just because the fact that all the tiles are at the top and you're interacting with them from the bottom. And you control a small person that's holding a die that you can change the value of, and you pick the value that you want and you throw it up on the screen, and if it touches another tile that has the same number on it, they both disappear and go down to the bottom of the screen. And you're rewarded for moving specific sets of values, like triple three, or for consecutive values. So if you can collect a 3, 4, and 5, and by collecting groups of them, you either punish your opponent or you remove additional rows from your own side.
Interesting. And so the world record is 640 by Cananophone. He has many of the world records on this list. It's always interesting to see these puzzle games specifically because you can tell the people who really, really, really take the time to get good at Big 20 sometimes optimize them to ridiculous levels. I'm thinking of like Yogi the Monk with Dr. Mario, like just took that speed run to a whole new level, like figuring out how to, I think he figured out an RNG manipulation and he just like knew how to react to everything.
Yeah,
So
these games
I
see
think they're
really
easy to overlook.
Yeah, these games get sort of really interesting attention from the Big 20 because I think the thing about puzzle games in general, these style of games where there's high variance, is that most people approach them from the perspective of playing it enough to get good at it. So you spend enough time and you sort of learn to recognize the patterns and get good at it that way. But I feel like for Big 20, a lot of people sort of take a different approach. They say, we don't have the time to put into it in that way. And so they try to figure out how to like manipulate RNG or figure out, clever tricks to do that. I'm reminded specifically of Arkanoid, which just has a ton of variance because it's just Breakout, but they figured out like the pixel perfect positions to spawn the warp power-ups, so you could just skip levels left and right. And so that sort of approach to this, I think, is one of the things that makes the Big 20 really unique, is that rather than just playing the game as intended, they sort of know that they're crunched for time, so their approach to games is just very different than I think the way most people's would be.
Yeah, and I think it really makes the top runners stand out, the kind of time they put into even games like that. Like if I were to do a tournament like this, like I did Tiny 10 and we had Yoshi's Cookie, I just learned how to be good at Yoshi's Cookie, like enough to get through it, but like they take it to another level, which is always fun to see. So, let's go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some fresh music from these games, and then we're going to talk about the other 10 games in this race.
So next up, we've got game number 11, Snow Brothers, or Snow Bros, if you want to say it that way. It's actually kind of unique because depending on the region, you'll see it listed as Snow Bros or Snow Brothers. So it's kind of, it's interesting which way you want to pronounce it. But the category for this one is listed as Beat the Penguin. Now I just want to put out there,
because I love penguins.
I'm just going to put this out there because this is a personal gripe of mine. There's no penguin in this game. The boss of floor 30 is actually two birds that are in no way penguin-like, and I actually had to ask the Big 20 community what the actual goal was, and they said that it was the boss of floor 30. So my personal gripe, no penguin in this game.
I love the way you spend your time throughout the day. I just want to point that out there.
Always wisely. Uh, this is an arcade game released in 1990 by Toaplan. I hadn't heard that name before.
Never heard of it.
I don't know whether or not they're well known, but I did look into them, and the only other game I recognized was Zero Wing, which, if you were around in the early 2000s, you may remember the "All Your Bases Belong to Us" meme, which was from Zero Wing, made by Toaplan. That's the only thing I know about them.
Thanks, Toaplan. I love that meme.
I'm just going to leave it at that. So this game was actually published for the NES in North America in 1991 by Capcom. So Capcom got the rights to publish this in North America specifically. It's very similar to Bubble Bobble in a lot of different ways. Specifically, sort of the arcade style of it, where when you clear out a screen, you sort of pop off of it and the panel slides. It feels like you're watching Bubble Bobble when you see it happen.
It's an action puzzler, which is a pretty common genre on the Game Boy, but only a few games really on the NES are action puzzlers. I think of like Solomon's Key and some other games.
Right.
It's I don't know how similar it is to the Game Boy port, but the Game Boy port was pretty frustrating and difficult, but it is a lot of fun. It's a neat little game.
Yeah, watching the game play, so I watched a little bit of the world record. It looks like a really interesting speedrun, and also it supports 2 players in a really nice way. So if you've seen Bubble Bobble, 2 players there is a really nice addition to the game. I love co-op games that you can actually sort of divide up tasks and cooperate properly, and this is one of those games. You can actually just sort of separate out and defeat enemies differently, or on your own. And since it's like Bubble Bobble, all it takes is clearing all the enemies off the screen to move on to the next level, so you can sort of split up and work on it together. Cool. So this game's really nice in that way. So the goal is to beat the boss of floor 30, which in the current world record is 8 minutes and 55 seconds in. I'm sure we'll see that time come down even further as we approach the Big 20 race, but looks like this should be a relatively straightforward goal, about 10 minutes long.
Cool.
So the next game we've got is Widget, and the category for this one is Beat the Game. Now, this one's near and dear to my heart. I ran this game after I ran the Super Nintendo version. So this is based on a TV series which debuted in 1990 and ran for 3 seasons and had 65 episodes. It was kind of a sort of vaguely Captain Planet style show. It starred a character named Widget, who is a world watcher who courageously protects the Earth from a variety of environmental harms. So this is sort of one of those.
Nice of him.
Yeah, it's one of those educational style shows. Widget's a lovable goof who.
You mean liberal propaganda?
Oh my God!
I'm just kidding.
Save our children. Don't let them watch. This is what happens when you let your TV parent your children. They're indoctrinated. So Atlas produced the Widget game for the Nintendo in 1992 and a sequel titled Super Widget in 1993 for the SNES. And I had the world record. My strats weren't that great. I put some time into it and tried to copy the task, but with all of this new attention being brought to the game, the people who are involved in the Big 20 definitely found some much more consistent strats, which helps a lot, and in addition, some faster stuff as well. So my world record was right over 12 minutes, and with all of the improvements that have been made, the world record's actually been brought down to just under 10 minutes. So they pick up additional gun upgrades that are pretty out of the way, that I had never really considered, and put the effort into routing this game properly, which is always nice to see.
Yeah, I think White Hat got the record in that, and I was actually just watching Arcus do attempts on it. It's a cool little game. You can switch between like different characters, like you can become like a mouse or a pig or something.
Yeah,
and
so
some
Widget was
stuff.
a shapeshifter in the show, so he could change into different forms. And so in the game, the way that works is that you can spend MP, I guess, magic points. I don't know. You can spend MP on transforming, and so one of his transformations is this little mouse that runs really fast but has no attack. And so the speed run, just basically every screen you enter transforms into the mouse almost immediately and runs through the screen.
Yeah, it seems like a kind of game that I'm surprised hasn't gotten more attention. It's really bright and colorful. It's kind of a cool platformer. It seems like it's a pretty rare game. I mean, I think it goes for like 40 or 50 bucks, but like I don't know how many times I've actually seen it on eBay or in game lots and stuff. So I think it's like
was super
pretty
popular.
uncommon.
I don't think Widget was a very popular franchise in the US.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, so I think that might have been the main issue. I know it was relatively popular in I want to say it was popular in Australia, and I think the show was produced in South Korea, if I'm not mistaken. and
Hmm.
so I think that it might have had some popularity there. But as a kid, I remember renting Super Widget, but I had never even heard of the Widget
Sure.
TV show or the NES game or anything like that. I didn't even know when I rented the Super Nintendo game that it was based on a cartoon. It was a colorful game.
Yeah, these are cool games. I think you should definitely check them out if you're looking for other platformers to not run and or to run. And again, it's kind of cool seeing some attention brought to some games that aren't, quite as commonly run until Big 20 gets them some attention. The next game on the list is Russian Attack, which I love because the name is perfect. It's Rush apostrophe N, but you're fighting in the Cold War against Russians, so it's like double entendre.
I've always been
It's pretty
very happy
great.
with the title of this game.
I'm quite happy with it. And this was originally released in Japan and Europe as Green Beret, but they realized that had no puns in it whatsoever, so they changed it in the US to Russian Attack. And it's a 1985 running gun platformer by Konami. It's a lot of fun. I played this when I first started getting into retro gaming and used to kind of want to kind of run this game, but the world record is by the second man as a 9:32.6, only 0.29 seconds ahead of second. So it's a pretty optimized time. And so basically, you run around with a knife and stab enemies, and then some enemies drop like different kind of gun upgrades that you'd expect in a game like this. There's only 4 stages, and the game loops once you beat them. So the goal is essentially to beat the game, but it's called beat stage 4 since you could keep playing. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, Konami made really good games at this time. It's really simple and short, but it's a good one. I believe it's one hit kills or
Oh, is
pretty
it?
pretty easy to die in
I
this
feel like
game. I
I've
don't
played
think
this
it's
game before,
super
but I don't
easy
remember.
game.
It's been so long.
Yeah, I played it and I enjoyed it, but it's been a hot minute. But definitely a game that is a ton of fun, I think. The next game is also another game that's a little bit lesser known, called Monster in My Pocket. The goal for this is to beat Stage 5. This was actually a media franchise that was created by two former senior executives from Mattel, the toy company. And I guess they had a whole franchise for this. I mean, they had toys, comics, a cartoon show, all kinds of stuff. I don't remember any of that. I don't know if you do.
No, I
There's a
don't.
lot of information on it. I figured we didn't need to get into
So
the
was there
plot
was
of.
like a TV show and everything?
There's like all kinds of stuff because they were like, oh, in the game, this person's a bad guy, but in the cartoon, they're a good guy. It was a lot of stuff. I was like, I did not know there was so much lore to Monster in My Pocket. But what's kind of cool about this game? It's another Konami game released in 1992. You're you're small characters, like you're traveling
Your
through this.
toys.
The Miles family. What's that?
You're like little toys. Like
Yeah, you're
that's
basically
the
toys.
scale
Yeah.
you're at.
Yeah, and you're traveling through the Miles family house. So it's kind of like Toy Story. You're like traveling through the house. So everything's big. So you'll see a key and it'll be like 3 times bigger than your sprite or whatever. The music and sound effects reminded me a lot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles too. Like it's very lighthearted and fun sounding and very colorful, which is kind of strange for kind of a horror themed game. You can choose between being a vampire or a monster. I know that the speedruns use vampire, but I couldn't find any like clear differences as to why. They
Do they
apparently both
they
have the
don't
same
obviously
jumping
play any
ability.
different?
From what I read, they both have the same double jump. They have the same play abilities. So
Interesting.
I'm not sure. Maybe their sprite sizes. Maybe one's a little bit quicker than the
It
other.
says
But
here it's got co-op mode. That's nice.
yeah, you can play 2-player co-op at the same time, which is cool. So we should probably try that at
It's
some
like a
point. And
platformer slash brawler, right? So
yeah, it's like I mean, it's not like Castlevania in terms of like the weapon attacks, but it's like it looks kind of like Castlevania, but it's not a beat 'em up. It's a platformer, but it's kind of a
okay,
combo. And
right.
the world records by Hyrexen. If you've seen that name before, he's kind of become one of those indie sweet types that kind of just started taking a bunch of world records from a bunch of long-standing NES games. And he has a 1621. The goal for Beat Stage 5 was completing his run around 9:18, so like a 9.5 minute time.
So we'll probably see
And
some sub tens from the top runners.
yeah, and it's a fun game. Honestly, it's a cool game. I've never actually sat down and casually played it, but it is a really neat game to look at. And I don't know. I'm surprised it doesn't have more attention. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, so next up we've got game number 15, which is Swordmaster, and the goal for this one is just beat stage 6. This was released in 1990 in Japan, but not in the US until 1992, in Europe until 1993, and this was developed by Athena and published by Athena and Activision.
Mhm.
And the world record in this game is 7:30 by Cananophone. He just said it 4 days ago, but the Japanese version's faster. You said
Well, the time for it is 6:35. I don't know if it's necessarily. I assume it's faster. I
Okay,
mean, for it to be that much of a difference, but I
sure.
don't know for sure. The only person I used to know that ran this was Spiderweb, and I don't think anybody had run it before him. I'm not sure about that, but it's never been heavily run. It's basically side-scrolling, um, medieval sword combat game. So there's
There's
very
a
little
lot of games.
platforming.
There's a lot of games on the NES that have basically the same title,
Yeah, it's
Swordmaster.
such a generic name.
Like I'm getting a bunch of games confused. Like I was thinking in my head that
Yeah.
Kha'Zix had run this, but that might have been another game of the same generic title.
Yeah, this is a really uncommon game. It's $170 loose. I don't think I've ever
Jeez.
even seen a copy. It's basically just the same kind of combat over and over, to be honest. There's very little platforming. I mean, there's a few places where you can jump and like fall off the stage, but for the most part, you're kind of fighting bosses. You have this experience meter that goes up. I don't remember what that does, if it raises your health or what, but there's various power-ups you gain throughout the game that lets you switch into a different character. So like you can turn into a wizard, for example. I think you can turn into like maybe a lizard creature or something else.
Oh, is this
The
the one where
speed
you can
run,
transform into a dragon? Or am I?
I don't know. You need to figure out what game you're thinking about.
Yeah.
You don't even know. You don't even
I
know.
don't know.
But you do. The speed run, from what I can tell, only uses the wizard.
Okay.
If it uses the transformations, for the most part, you're using the knight. And the goal can be done in about 4.5 minutes. This beat stage 6. Um, there is an out of bounds trick. I thought that it wasn't in the goal. I might have missed which goal I hit. There's an out of bounds trick in level 6, so maybe they did keep that. So it might be more than 4.5 minutes. I apologize, but there is a cool damage boost into the wall where you can jump above the level for a large part of it, which is kind of cool. But for the most part, it's kind of slow plotting. Kind of reminds me of like Astananax or whatever, but it's like
Oh.
really combat based. Like you want to get your parries in before they swipe at you, and you can put your shield up. It's an interesting game. It's not one you've probably ever seen. It's pretty uncommon.
Yeah, so next up we've got Wacky Races, and for
Woo!
Wacky Races, the goal is beat the boss of B3. There's sort of like three tracks you could play in the game. Three. I guess the idea is supposed to be that they're race circuits, and the
Yeah.
boss of B3 is the one that's the goal for this one. We actually featured this game in episode 11. That was our episode that we combined with an AGDQ 2016 recap. And since that episode, the game has definitely gone up in price. It was at the time $130, and now it's $170. So
Yeah, just keeps going up. Some
it
of these games.
probably won't stop. So this is based on a cartoon that was produced by Hanna-Barbera, Barbera, and it was released in 1991 by Atlas in cooperation with Hanna-Barbera. You can pick up power-ups. So throughout the game, you can pick up. So you play as Muttley in the game, and you can pick up these bones that allow you to change your weapon, change what you're using. It's a very, very straightforward platforming game with very
It's a
little.
similar upgrade system to like Gradius, where you can like hit a button to switch between what you want to use the upgrade towards. So like you can add to your health meter, or you can get bombs, or you can get the ability to like fly for a short period of time. So you're constantly like managing which bones you get to use whatever ability that you need most at a certain time. So like you use the bombs a lot on the bosses. You want to float over certain things. It's a really kind of precisely routed game. It's very interesting.
Yeah, this is a really fun game to run. I ran it a little bit a long time ago. It's a super fun game to play. It's very optimized. So the world record's by Callum. If you're not familiar with him, he is an incredibly accomplished speedrunner. He
Hmm.
he he gets world
SML one
records.
world
He
record.
gets
Yeah.
world records and he holds them. Like that's just how he works. The world record for the entire game is 1843, but he beats the level 3 boss at the 7 minute and 43 second mark. So this will probably
And I
be.
don't know if that would be changed, if I don't know with like which, because you can pick certain circuits in certain orders, so I don't know for sure if that equates or not, but I would
Yeah,
guess it
I'm not
does.
sure whether or not he plays track A first or track B first. I can't
Yeah.
remember.
So I
But
would assume it does, but I
so
don't
this
know.
is, I mean, this is really optimized. It's and it's a really fascinating speed run between managing those power ups because at any given time there's really three of the four that you can choose that you would want. I think that there's you mentioned the flight
The
and you mentioned
bark.
the
The bark
bombs.
is the one that
The
you don't
bark
really
is the
use.
one
You
you don't
might use it
use.
once in the
But
speed run.
being able to use the full heal is really valuable for being able to damage boost on bosses and damage boost through sections of the level. You don't have to hunt down individual hearts or health refills like you would in some games. Just naturally using your bones to spend on health refills is how you typically manage that, and it's a very, very interesting routing experience.
It's a fun watch. It's definitely a fun game to learn. It's not one I would want to grind for world record. It is super optimized, so you'd have to put a lot of time in. The next game is Tailspin. The goal is to beat the game. This is actually a show I did watch as a kid,
I did
based
too.
on Baloo. Is it Baloo? No, that's Jungle Book, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't remember his
Yeah,
name, but I do
he's some
remember the
bear. He's
theme
a bear who
song.
flies a plane.
The
He's a
theme
dumb
song
bear who
for
flies a
Tailspin
plane.
is really good. That's a
Yeah.
strong theme song from
Yeah,
my
it was
head.
a good show. And so this is another one of those Capcom Disney games. This was released in 1991, and actually, it was also released as part of the Disney Afternoon Collection that was released in 2017, this past year, for Xbox One, PS4, and PC. It had 6 classic NES Disney games like Chip and Dale, DuckTales 1 and 2. This was included in that list.
I've never
And this is
understood this game as a speedrun. I really haven't. So
no, it's a weird game.
it's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. You're in the plane basically for the entire game, and it is kind of unique in that regard because you can sort of turn the plane around. It's not like Gradius style where the screen moves consistently in one direction. You just kind of hover around on it. You really do
Mhm.
have full kind of control of your movement, but it's not. I don't know. It's never really struck me as a strong speed game, but it is kind of a classic NES game, so I see why it's on this list.
Mhm. Yeah, the world record is 1612 by Zimond. I had to play the Game Boy port, which is really similar. The game's hard to control, kind of, I feel like I always have struggled with it. I never enjoyed it that much casually when I like tried playing it on the NES back in the day. But it is a lot of fun. There's also a Genesis TurboGrafx 16 Game Gear set of games that actually are completely differently styled. They have actual platforming and such.
Yeah.
This is only flying in the plane, and I mean, it's a good game. It's good enough. It's just you have to get used to the controls, and it also has this thing where I mean, it's a shooter, but you can only shoot like one bullet at a time unless you get an upgrade. So once you've used that, if something's about to hit you, then you're kind of screwed. So it's kind of a tough game, but I don't think it'll be too much trouble for people casually, and definitely not for people who've learned it. But the next game is the big hitter. Could be its
Yes.
own episode for sure.
Yeah, I think we're gonna sort of punt on talking about this game too much because this would make a really strong episode on its own. But the next game is Castlevania 2, or Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest, if you prefer. This is an action platforming game released by Konami in Japan in 1987 and North America in 1988. I mean, everyone knows the Castlevania series for the most part. I mean,
Mhm.
our second episode was on Castlevania.
Third episode.
Third up. What
We
was our
went
second?
Biomiracle. No, maybe it was our second. It was
Yeah,
our
I think it was our
second, and
second.
then Alien Syndrome was third. Yeah.
Yeah, so this game, if you're familiar with the classic Castlevania series, this departs from the typical format. It definitely plays more like an adventure game than the standard
Yep.
platformer that you might be used to in the other classic Castlevania series. Certainly, there's a difference in style for the classic Castlevania series and the ones that were uh, produced by what was his name?
Ego.
Iga
Ego.
Igarashi.
Igarashi.
So
Egomanias.
yeah, a lot of those are sometimes referred to
Egomanias.
as Egavanias, and these are the classic Vanias. This is the real outlier for the classic Vanias because it plays very much like an adventure game. It almost feels like you're playing something like Zelda 2 or something like that.
Yeah, I
Link
like this
levels.
game quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a really cool game.
I when I was getting into retro gaming, like I don't do a lot of casual NES playing anymore, but when I was first getting into collecting 5 or so years ago, I would find games I hadn't played as a kid and play through them really before I got into Twitch streaming and stuff. And this was one I went through with a guide. I strongly do recommend going through it with a guide for certain parts because it is very cryptic. Uh, Classically, a lot of people know that there's a part where if you have a certain stone or orb, you have to just kneel in a random spot and a tornado picks you up and takes you somewhere. The game has NPCs that straight up lie to you and don't tell you what to do. It's like a postmodern video game. I don't understand this game. There'd be a lot of discussion as to why this game is designed the way it is, but it is a really fun game. It's got exploration as a night-day cycle where the night enemies are much more powerful than the day enemies. You do go into towns much like Zelda 2 and talk to people and get certain items.
What a
There's only
terrible
like
night to
three
have a curse.
castles. Yeah, it's a terrible night to have a curse is the classic line. And it only has like 3 dungeons or so. It doesn't have a ton of dungeons. There's a lot of exploring throughout the world and getting to those 3 or 4 dungeons.
Yeah, I
Um,
love this style of game. The current world record, I think it's still held by JC. The world record is like 30-ish minutes, right around there. But this goal is to beat death and get the golden dagger. That's the boss of a very specific dungeon, and it's 18 minutes into the world record. But due to the nature of this game being sort of open exploration, because the goal isn't to beat the game fully, and in the world record obviously they were beating the game fully, it may not take 18 minutes to actually achieve this
yeah,
goal.
there
You
may
may be
be
able to get,
shortcuts. Yeah.
yeah, you may be able to get to death more directly without having to do all the things that JC does before that. So I can't estimate how long this goal would take, but it would certainly be around 20 minutes worst case if they have to do it the way the world record does it.
Yeah, it's interesting that this is the 18th game because if that is the case, this is the longest one. And I feel like generally they put a longer game at the end, like a 20-30 minute game, and that's actually not the case this time. So it is kind of interesting. It'll have to take time to show whether or not there is a quicker route to doing this outside of the speed run of the full game. But more about that game maybe at a later time for a full episode because there's a lot to it, and it's a very interesting sequel to a pretty straightforward Castlevania One game.
I can't believe we haven't
Um,
done an episode on this next game yet.
yeah,
It
it's
just
kind
blows
of
my
weird that
mind.
we haven't.
Yeah, so the next game up is Little Samson. If you're
This is
familiar,
the collector's dream for
yeah,
most NES collectors.
most people know this game by reputation for being as valuable of a game as it is. It's not necessarily the case that people recall it specifically for the gameplay, though this game is an absolutely fantastic game to play. It's a ton of fun blind. It's a ton of fun casually. Would strongly recommend anyone to play through it.
Yeah, this game is listed on price charting, which is kind of a general reference of like eBay and Amazon and stuff as being worth almost $1,100. I remember when I first got into retro collecting, this game was like $300. So it's just crazy to see that something could be, worth 4 times as much at that level. But
Yeah,
this is
for
kind of
the
the holy grail for most collectors because Stadium Events is like it's not a good game, and then it was like re-released as a game that's only $3. So like Stadium Events is kind of just like a lame collector's item. I mean, not really. I don't mean to say that, but it's not like you can get the game as world class track meet or whatever, and it's $3, and it's just like different sprites. This game is really hard to find. It is a lot of fun. It's actually known in Japan as Sairi Densetsu. Lickle, which is Holy Bell Legend Lickle. I have no clue what that means. But it was developed by Takeru and published by Taito. It's another one of those late Taito releases. A lot of the late Taito releases are the several $100 games on NES, and it was released in 1992 in Japan and North America, 93 in EU. And it's a really awesome platformer. You can switch between multiple characters that each have unique abilities and weaknesses. So you have Little Samson as the main character. He's pretty balanced. He's quick. He can jump high. He can grab walls in the ceiling. Then you've got a dragon you can switch to that has a temporary flying ability. You have Gam the Golem. He's very slow, but his big ability is that he can walk on spikes, which normally the characters cannot. He's also very powerful with high defense, and he's the only character that can attack in all 4 cardinal directions, so he can attack above him and stuff as well. And then the main thing you see in the speedrun is KO the Mouse, who is very fast, does huge jumps, but also can climb on ceilings and walls. And the bomb attack for the mouse is heavily exploited in the speed run to do
Yeah, the
just
bomb is super
tons of damage.
powerful. Every frame that it's hitting an enemy, it's dealing damage, and so it's massive,
Yeah,
massive damage output.
I don't think the game intended for you to like be inside an enemy sprite and drop like 4 bombs. So it just like if you space them out the right way, it just does damage for like a full second straight, which basically kills bosses instantly. So it's a really optimized game. It actually, I remember a few years ago, it kind of had a revolution where like White Hat and Toad swept in and started destroying the previous world records.
Yeah, so there was a
Um,
discovery. So the way this game works is that you can pause at any time and change which character you're controlling at that moment. It's really nice. That's sort of the way the game is designed to let you constantly be picking and choosing which characters you want to use to tackle different obstacles throughout the stages. But the thing is that the characters have very different hitboxes boxes. So KO the mouse is very small. Gall or Gam is very large. The dragon Kakira is somewhere in between, and so you can exploit that actually to go out of bounds. You can position yourself as the mouse like in the corner of where like a ceiling and a wall meet, and by changing into the dragon, for instance, you can push yourself into the wall. And this game has some unique glitches. I'd love to talk about it in a full episode. It doesn't really make sense to talk about it here, but just due to the nature of the way the game scrolls, it allows you to sort of scroll horizontally and then vertically sometimes, and horizontally again, to like map out a stage. If you can touch the edge of the screen when you're not in the section you're supposed to be in, you can sometimes get the stage to end way early, so you're like only halfway through the stage and the game just thinks it's over.
Yeah, this game got broken. I think our friend X Dragon still has the world record in some of the no out of bounds categories,
And
but
he's still
basically
got a
once
pretty competitive time for the out of bounds
yeah,
categories.
he had put a ton of time into this game, and then when Toad and White Hat came along, somebody found these out of bounds and kind of broke it. So the 80% easy world record is by Toad 22484 with an 854. As a comparison, the normal world record for the same category is 1255, so it's a lot shorter, about 4 minutes shorter.
Yeah,
And so most of the categories, there's a lot of categories in this game. It's a combination of the difficulty, which can be easy or normal, and then allowing out of bounds. And then there's even some little Samson only categories where you don't use the additional characters.
Yeah, the out of bounds tricks were found by X Dragon, but Toad and
Oh,
White
okay.
Hat were the ones who optimized them and found new places to use them to
Yeah.
really blow the game wide open.
It's a really cool. This is probably the most interesting speed game from this list, I would say, in terms of like actual glitches and tricks and a lot of the other games on this list so far have been very execution heavy. I think of stuff like Wacky Races and stuff like that, Monster in My Pocket, kind of just straightforward platformers, not a lot of tricks. This game is definitely a lot more broken and a lot more, has a lot more flash to it.
Right.
And then the last game is Shadow of the Ninja. If you listen to the last pocket, we talked about Ninja Gaiden Shadow, which this was basically a port of. This was ported to the Game Boy as Ninja Gaiden Shadow, essentially, and later changed into a Gaiden game. You can go back and listen to that podcast with Proto Magical Girl if you kind of want the history behind that. But it was originally released in Japan as Yami no Shigotonen Kage, which is the Darkness Worker Kage, released in 1990 in Japan and North America, and 91 in Europe. Developed by Natsume and published by Natsume and Taito. And basically, it's Ninja Gaiden Shadow. It's a ninja platformer. You slash in front of you. You can hang from different like platforms, or you can jump on platforms or hang from them, and it's really straightforward. It's got some good music, some cool graphics, but nothing crazy to talk about. The world record's 1112 by Charleon, and our boy Blackie, I just had to point this out, is second with 1115.
Nice.
I love seeing Blackie on leaderboards, makes me excited. So and it can be played, it's co-op, so me and you maybe need to hop on it, do a little co-op.
We're finding a lot of co-op
play.
games this Big 20.
Yeah, that's interesting. It'd be kind of cool to see a co-op
20.
Big 20.
I was just
How
about
cool
to
would
say
that? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
they need to have a co-op Big 20. That'd be really cool.
Like see like Yogi the Monk and Toad like co-op it. It would be
White Hat and
pretty
Toad
cool.
go hang out again.
Yeah, it would be pretty cool to see something built around that. But I'd say a little bit of I would have rather seen it end with Castlevania 2 or
I think it would have made
Little
sense to
Samson.
end with Castlevania 2 beat the whole
Yeah.
game. And then
Ooh.
the nice thing about that would have been it would have shown the true variance of people who choose to do a marathon safe route or people who choose to go for blob boost.
Ooh. How much does that save?
Blob boost? I think
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know, 7-10 minutes or something over the course of the
Oh wow.
Because
Okay.
you skip you basically enter a dungeon from the wrong end by getting an enemy to boost you into a area you're not supposed to have access to.
Oh.
But it's super random. Like when people are grinding for the world record, they basically enter that room, and if they don't get the RNG they need for the blob to like be at exactly the right spot and get the knockback that they need, it's like an instant reset.
Wow. Yeah, that kind of would have been interesting, although maybe they just didn't want it to bank so much on a RNG based
Well,
trick.
I think most people would have gone for marathon safe route where you don't do blob boost.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting, but a really cool list. They're going to run out of NES games one of these days. But I think they're still putting together some.
I mean, there's only what, like
good
900 games on the
Yeah, we've had to have knocked off like 100 something. I mean, I guess there's a lot more to go for if there's been eight of these.
Yeah,
That's
I think Big 20
160
number
games.
5, no, Big 20 number 6 was all Famicom games, like Famicom only
Oh yeah, yeah,
releases.
yeah. That was cool.
And they've had a few games that got repeated, so Metroid has
Metroid's
seen
twice.
I think it was 3 times cuz one time it was beat Kraid, one
Oh,
time it was beat Ridley, and I think one time it might have been beat the game. Maybe it was only twice. Maybe you're right. But Metroid has definitely showed up a handful of times. So there's been some overlap, but like at this point, we're definitely hitting like the 150 games. There's 900 games on the NES, but there's not 900 good games on the NES. You know
it's
what I mean?
true. I mean, it's not like you're gonna put like bases loaded in there or like
God
RBI
willing.
baseball or so. It's cool, kind of just looking back at the previous Big 20s before we end. There's been 7 of them. A lot of repeat winners. The first 2 are actually won by Toad 22484. The third by Yogi the Monk. Then Toad came back, won again for the fourth. Then Yogi the Monk came back and won for the fifth. So the first 5 were all won by 2 people, which is kind of cool to see. Since there's such a variety of speed games, it's just interesting to see the talent that somebody can learn, so many different games and be that good. It's not like, oh, these games fit this person's style. These guys are just that good at adapting to whatever they get.
Right.
Then Cool Kid, who is a really great Mega Man speedrunner and NES runner in general, won the sixth. And then the seventh was actually won by Prissy3, who is another Mega Man speedrunner. So it'll be interesting to see who wins 8. I know Arcus has been putting in the time. Do you know who else has been like really investing a lot of time in this?
I'm
Sounds like Cananaphone.
pretty sure Yogi the Monk is back in it. White Hat and Toad. Well, I know White Hat's been working hard on it. I don't know if Toad's doing it. I would imagine that Arcus is doing it.
Arcus is definitely doing it. I was watching him today.
It's kind of interesting
So
to look at the dates as well. So the Big 20s have always been set up so that once the game list is announced, you get 1 month until the actual race happens. So that's 30
mhm.
days. And so it's kind of interesting looking at the dates because the first 2 were only 3 months apart, which means there was only 2 months of downtime between the race and the next setup.
Poor Toad.
I think that's one of the things that turned a lot of people away from the Big 20. Not that it's a criticism of the Big 20, but I think that a lot of people were kind of choosing how to allocate their time in a way that they decided that they didn't want to devote that much of their time to the Big 20s.
Mhm.
And so the Big 20s did certainly seem to cut back a lot. So they sort of hit a rhythm where they've been doing it every 6 months or so. This one is a little earlier than 6 months from the last one, but in general, they've been spacing them out about, I would
Yeah.
say, every 6 months. So,
It's interesting. I think the month thing also kind of gives a bit of motivation towards it. Like, I know Tiny Ten's not as big because it's Game Boy, but we give a lot of time to prepare. And I think sometimes getting that pressure of I only have a month, like, forces people to start learning right away once the game list is announced because the clock starts right then. Whereas, like, if you have like several months, sometimes it's easy to kind of just be like, oh, I'll get to this down the road. But it's an intense grind and it's a lot of fun. It really does improve a lot of times throughout the NES library every single time it's done. This was kind of one of the first big races in general before all the tournaments started, before all the different like big events or like these side events outside of GDQ like Californiathon, Buckeye Speed Bash, all those things. This was kind of the big thing in between GDQs.
yeah, my
So it
jokes about Metroid and my criticisms about the amount of time it takes to get into it aside, I will certainly say that the Big 20 races have certainly hit that niche that's really fantastic in the way that it really brings a lot to the NES speedrunning community. Every one of these games gets so much attention, so much love that they otherwise wouldn't have seen. I've had the widget world record for like 2 years now. No one's really been even interested in touching it, and because of how frustrating the route that I had come up with was, I wasn't really interested in improving it either. And all it took was a Big 20 for everyone to converge on it and really find consistent, great strats that improve the game so much. So, I mean, the things that this does to these speed games is really fantastic.
Alien Syndrome. Alien Syndrome. Come on, we're running out of games.
Yeah, it's
Someone's got
true.
to do Alien Syndrome.
We need like a whole Big 20 that's just of either Tengen or
Unlicensed.
other unlicensed
Oh,
games.
that would be so good.
That would be,
Oh
I
my
would jump back in on
gosh.
that Big 20, I feel like.
Absolutely. It'd be so terrible. Oh,
Tengen Gauntlet, Tengen Tetris.
you've got like just Color Dreams games all over
Oh
the
my god.
place. Get
Oh
get your
no, no,
Escape from
don't
Atlantis.
take my Color Dreams world records.
Escape from Atlantis Secret Scout. It'd just be a great
No,
time.
leave Secret Scout alone. That's my baby.
Okay. So any last thoughts before we plug everything?
Uh, I mean, we certainly don't envision the sort like everyone to be interested in definitely jumping in on these, but you should certainly watch the Big 20 race when it comes along. Like we said at the beginning, the world record, or sorry, the race is happening on March 3rd at 1 p.m. and it'll be broadcast on twitch.tv/bestns. They always have really great commentators and do a great job of
Mhm.
highlighting all the people who are participating in it. You should definitely check it out.
Absolutely. I don't want to see interest wane in this event. I do like it quite a bit. And I know there's a lot of options out there now that didn't used to exist when this started, but I still think it's a premium event in the speedrun community. I don't know if we're always going to continue to do these giant lists every single time they come out, but I think we've had fun doing it. I think it's a nice way to highlight a bunch of games that people really don't get to see a lot, which is something that we're passionate about. So that's a lot of fun. If people want to see you speedrun Widget and get your world record back, where can they find you?
Nowhere, because that's not going to happen. But if you want
Okay.
to see me speedrun other things, you can see me at twitch.tv/authorblues. I'm also on Twitter and YouTube as AuthorBlues as well. How about you?
You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at John Carls, and YouTube is John Carls1. Also, you can find all of the Framesavers content at theframesavers.com. It has links to all of our different things. We've been doing a lot of live episodes on our Twitch, so we want to push that you would follow that at twitch.tv/theframesavers. We also want to give a shout out to Warp World Podcast. You can find them at podcast.warp.world. They're friends of ours. They do a bunch of modern gaming news and modern kind of Twitch news. That's a lot of fun. And Grand Pooh Bear, X Water, and Jack, who are on that, check that out. Also, big, huge thanks to Brian Morgenthau, our producer. You can find him at BMorgs TV on Twitter and Twitch. And also a big shout out to our patrons on patreon.com. We do have $25 patrons we shout out in our full episodes, but you can find Tina Hacks, Mr. Pizak, and Kip on Twitch if you want to follow them as well. And that's about it. So we're excited to continue doing stuff on Twitch. Come check us out. We're trying to do Sunday nights at 8 p.m. And try and do that consistently every other week for our main episodes.
Definitely.
So until the next one, we'll see you later.
Later.